At Strayer University, we help students like you go from, is it possible? To anything is possible by offering access to up to 10 no-cost gen ed courses, so you can reach your goals affordably and fast. Visit strayer.edu to learn more. No-cost gen eds provided by Strayer University affiliate Sophia. Eligibility rules apply. Connect with us for details. Strayer University is certified to operate in Virginia by Chev and has many campuses, including at 2121 15th Street North in Arlington, Virginia.
This episode is brought to you by Dogfish Head Craft Brewery. The Grateful Dead and Dogfish Head have gotten the band back together with the release of Grateful Dead Juicy Pale Ale, a light-bodied pale ale brewed with sustainable Kernza grains, granola, and heaps of good karma for a refreshing brew that's music to your taste buds. Available nationwide. Visit dogfish.com to find Grateful Dead Juicy Pale Ale in your neck of the woods. Dogfish Head Craft Brewery is located in Milton, Delaware. Please drink responsibly.
The greatest musicians of them all making their first appearance in front of an audience for goodness knows how long. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Welcome to episode 248 of Something About the Beatles. And this is one that has been months in the making, in that the book that is sparking this conversation, Take a Sad Song, The Emotional Currency of Hey Jude, came out in the spring of 2022, and it's taken me this long to get a show taped and put together and put out there, for a variety of reasons, but I think you will agree it has been worth the wait, with author James Campion, as well as returning SATB guest favorite Jeff Martin, always full of great, thoughtful observations and insights on whatever we're talking about Beatle-wise. And if you're new to the show, you may want to check out the episodes he's appeared in, the Fly on the Wall episodes, which we did at least a couple, and other stuff, Truth and Beauty, and keyboards, and he originally started with SATB 5 years ago with The Simpsons Show. And it's like the least of it, but it cracked that door open, and we've been talking ever since, and I'm glad to have him back on the show. But James is also pretty amazing. Not only was his book terrific, and I do recommend it, anyone out there that's skeptical listening to this, like, how the hell do you get a book out of Hey Jude? Well, it is a long song, but there is so much to talk about, and he really assembled an A-team of, I don't want to use the word expert because I think that's kind of a pejorative to some people, but let's just say a lot of smart, informed, thoughtful people to shine light on various aspects of the song. So basically anything you want to sort of deconstruct out of Hey Jude, because it is an amazingly compelling and universal song, you cannot deny. So he's basically exploring every corner of it and trying to get to the bottom of what makes it as powerful as it is. And he has done as fine a job as anybody can do. I found him extremely enjoyable to converse with on the show, and I hope to have him back. And he's got other writings out there, too. A lot of other books. You can check them out. One on Warren Zevon comes to mind. But he's quite an active writer, and I suggest you check him out. His chops are unbelievable. But it's interesting that stuff that I saw online of his, how it was such a different voice than the voice of the Hey Jude book. So you'll see what I mean if you go out there and find it. Anyway, I don't want to belabor this. It's holiday weekend as this is going out in America. I'm not sure how you'll be listening to it or when. It would make a good traveling companion if that's what you're doing this weekend. But in any event, wishing everybody as we get near the end of 22 a wonderful year. Might be a little early for that, but I guess I'm looking at the end of the road with the shows I've got in the can that will be filling out the remainder of this year, plus other things on the agenda for taping. We're kind of winding down 2022, but I'm already looking into next year, 2023, and the stuff that will be coming out then. A few surprises along the way, I think it is safe to say. Not too much I can talk about right now at this juncture. This show is, of course, sponsored by BetterHelp. Go to betterhelp.com/SATB, S-A-T-B, for 10% off your first month of treatment. Now, on with the show. Jeff just finished reading the book recently. I read it back when it was first sent to me. Tremendous effort. If I can lead with one general question, and then Jeff, you can take it or wherever we go with this. But I guess the obvious thing as a starting point is, what was it that motivated you, gave you the idea of writing this book, such a deep dive on a single track?
Well, I always loved Hey Jude since I was a little kid. So it's kind of has a mystical quality for me.
Mhm.
So when I set out to write a book about one song, which I was motivated, and I've given shout outs in previous interviews to people like Gretel Marcus, who wrote that wonderful book about Like a Rolling Stone, Dave Marsh, who wrote a book about Louie Louie, my friend Alan Light, who wrote a book about Hallelujah, so many others, a wonderful book about White Christmas out there, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I wanted to tackle a song, and this song kept coming back to me. It kept popping up over the years, giving me little hints. I write about it in my introduction, not only my experience as a kid, but also seeing that James Corden car karaoke thing with Paul going through Liverpool, and then watching Paul play this song everywhere and everyone singing those famous nanas. So if I had to tackle a song, this one kept popping up. That's really the simple answer to it.
And it does seem to have a unique place in the Beatles canon, not only as highly, highly successful single when it came out, groundbreaking and unique in its own way at 7+ minutes, being the non-album single during the year they're taking on all their chores themselves, business, starting Apple, all that stuff. Anyway, it is unique in a lot of ways. The inspiration being something direct from their personal lives made it unique and about a real person initially, at least, before it got bigger. John thinking it was about him, Paul saying it's about me. What I found was interesting, and I didn't know this till recently, that you and Adam Gerwitz from Counting Crows have a podcast.
Yes.
Which I didn't realize when I first read the book. And when he pops up in the book, the first thought I had was I had done a show a few years ago. I think it was from the 50th anniversary of 1968. We were looking back and I had Candy Leonard on the show. And I did like a montage of music and sound of the year just to try to convey to listeners what a crazy, tumultuous year 1968 was.
Yeah.
And then right on the heels of, in my own hometown of Chicago, of course, the Democratic Convention, skulls being split in the street after 2 major assassinations that year and cities torched to the ground, things like that. This song of healing and the right thing at the right time, which happens so often in Beatles history. And when I saw you had Adam in the book, and I'm thinking, right after Sandy Hook happened, and the song itself has nothing whatsoever to do with that, but I kept finding myself with A Long December in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And the commonality of na, 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 na.
Another na. Yeah.
It's like an echo of that. It's like, for me, that was a song of healing. Maybe this year will be better than the last.
Right. Yeah.
That was my own personal experience. It means nothing to anybody, but I'm just pointing out as something resonated with me when I was reading your book. So
that's a great anecdote. I'll share that with Adam because he says in my book, I put nanas in Long December. I can only do it for 2 stanzas. It's amazing the Beatles let it go for that long because it's just beautifully done by George Martin, the way he builds up all the instruments. But you hit on the head all the things I discovered after picking Hey Jude and deciding, okay, this is the song I want to write about. Is there enough for a book? Because I had written essays. I wrote a long form essay about Somewhere Over the Rainbow, speaking of that song, about 2 years prior. And it kind of inspired me to dive. And that was only a 5,000 word piece. But I said, can you get a book out of this? And then I discovered all the things you just mentioned. Everything the Beatles were going through. And then some. Yeah, everything the Beatles were going through personally with Linda and Paul and John and Yoko, Ringo leaving the band, the death of Brian Epstein, the turmoil within the Beatles post Maharishi. And then you have the turmoil of the world. A world, by the way, at least from the youth movement under 30, that the Beatles helped build. I mean, that you could make the argument that the 1960s on a sociological aspect, and I have a sociologist say this in the book, began when Ed Sullivan introduced them onto stage. It affected the entire zeitgeist. And of course, it launched a million bands, like the first Ramones album, or, that kind of thing. So
Paul Ramone.
We're all Beatles guys. So we know what the impact was. But it never occurred to me, I had no idea the song was the longest running Beatles song at #1 in America ever. Mm-hmm. It was #1 in more countries than any other. It was the first song they recorded on 8-track. It was the first release for Apple, as you mentioned. And it was the last single, which I didn't even know when I started the book, but Devin McKinney, a wonderful author of Magic Circles, told me, it's the last time that all 4 Beatles walked into a studio and left to record a single for a single. It's, just that song, like they did in 1962 with Love Me Do. And they had done it throughout their whole career, whether it was like Day Tripper or, I'm talking about We Can Work It Out and Strawberry. Yeah, they were a singles/album band. They released only 5 singles after Hey Jude, maybe 6. Almost all of them were on either Abbey Road or Let It Be. And the only other single they released separately was Ballad of John and Yoko, which was recorded with just Paul and John. So there was no Ringo and George there. So when I heard that, I mean, so many things kept piling up, Robert, that I was like, wow, there really is a book here.
It's hitting you over the head with a hammer. It's like, yes,
over
this
and
is
over.
the song.
Right.
Yeah, unbelievable. And if somebody had asked me before I saw your book, can you get a book length, serious, important, insightful examination of the song, even at something as glorious as Hey Jude, a book length, I would have been a little skeptical, thinking, well, okay, how is this book going to be padded? There's no padding here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. If anything, it was a 60, I'll tell you, I'll give you inside baseball here for a sec. It was a 60, I was contracted for a 60,000 word book by Backbeat Books, my publisher. And I blew over that. And the reason why I did is because I thought I'd get maybe 1, 2, 4, 5 professors, 4, 5 songwriters, 3, 4 Beatle biographers and Paul McCartney biographers. I never thought I'd get Michael Lindsay Hogg, who directed the Hey Jude video. I never thought I would get as many songwriters of different genders and different generations. And all the professors, it took me a while to get them. But once I did, people really opened up and said, you're doing what now? Oh, okay. All right, I'm in. And so when you start, as you know, you read the book, you both guys read the book. I'm really just a guide. I'm trying, I mean, my writing is in there, but I'm trying to get everyone to kind of formulate why a song affects an entire generation like this. That year, Song of the Year, Billboard, #1 song of the whole year, and then continues to resonate where I just saw Paul McCartney play it in June at Syracuse, and everybody got up and sang it. Kids who were 16, kids who were 10, people who were 70, everybody's up and singing. I mean, I kept asking people, and I hope you guys can give me your thoughts on why the hell these songs work and why they stay with us for all these years.
Take it away, Jeff.
So much to discuss. First of all, I love the book, James. And when Robert steered me to it, I want to thank you for pushing me back to Hey Jude, you know. And,
I'm glad.
And when Robert steered me to the book, I had the same thought as you. Gee, a whole book? Great song. But not only, as Robert said, is there no padding, I do have further thoughts that we'll get to eventually.
Great.
Yes, it is interesting that it's become, it seems to me, the central Beatles song, or at least certainly the central McCartney song. Because back in the 70s, when he was going back into concert, I would say the big highlight was when he would go into Yesterday. When I saw him at Dodger Stadium 3 years ago, and I don't think he does Yesterday, or he didn't in that show. But it's still building to Hey Jude, and he's done it at the Olympics, at Red Square, in the East Room of the White House. It's become his finale. Yeah, so the question is why?
That's what I asked everybody, and there was so many different answers. And I'll tell you, I'll give you one answer about Yesterday versus Hey Jude, because a lot of people ask me about Let It Be versus Hey Jude, right? Because there's, you know, a lot of people conflate those. They're both piano ballads sung by Paul McCartney, but you hit upon something very important. Yesterday is such an intimate, solemn song. There's no sing-along with Yesterday. No. If you're in your car, you're saying that's the beauty of Hey Jude. It is that intimate song that Paul does so well with Here, There, and Everywhere and Yesterday. But it's also that rousing, amazing ability to get everyone to sing. I think his greatest ballad besides Hey Jude is Maybe I'm Amazed, because it presents that same thing where he leads up to that. And I know it's a bold statement. I'm sure you'll probably push me on that. But for sure, for me, that song is a similar, wow, it builds up and builds up to where I thought it was one of the better things he did back in June when I saw him on this last tour. So yeah, I mean, that's the short answer of why versus Yesterday versus Hey Jude. And I think I posit in the book, and someone else brought it up to me. Let It Be, when it was released, the Beatles were already pretty much done. They were done certainly in a legal aspect. There had been some leaks about Paul leaving and everything. But I think with the film and everything, people have such a downer. Not anymore. It's a very sweet, beautiful, inspiring song. But then it really, you know, it was sort of like this epitaph to the Beatles. Let It Be.
Right down to the packaging.
Right down to the back with 4 separate guys. Yes.
Yeah, and black.
Well, that could be as simple as, you know, if the message is let it go, all things shall pass. Okay, true enough. And yet we'd rather dwell on whatever we decide the ultimate message of Hey Jude is.
Right.
Which is something along the lines of, you can do this. You don't have to do it alone.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I think a lot of people who were against Hey Jude, and I interviewed them in the book at the time because they felt like the Beatles weren't getting their noses dirty the way the Stones were with Street Fighting Man or Sly and the Family Stone, or people who were commenting on what was going on in the streets and in the, for the generation. Let It Be sort of is that underlined. Things are going to be crazy and wacky, but what are you going to do? Just be calm, smile, and go on. Hey Jude is a little bit more challenging. It's telling us you could make this better. If you look within yourself, I think I quote Gandhi in the book, which is be the change you want to see. So It comes from you first. And I think that's very cool that Paul went there.
Maybe start with just, if you say the message of the song is ultimately, Hey Jude. At the end, at the na-nas, they're saying, na-na. They could sing something like, na 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 na, all is love. They sing, na 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 na.
Good point.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. I mean,
I never thought of that. Very good.
Something very broad, but instead they say, Hey Jude. And just break it down to, well, in the first place, how odd is it? We all know the story that he was singing to John's son, consoling him, about the impending divorce, singing Hey Jules. And Paul said he changed it to Jude because Paul says it sounded more country and Western to me. I don't know. It's an odd name. It sounds like a girl's name to me at the time.
Exactly right. It could go either way. And
there were 0 famous Judes in the world. Jude was one of the 12 apostles. It's the penultimate book of the New Testament. And there were no famous Judes, and there's been exactly one since that I know of, Jude Law. But
good point.
To say that Hey Jude doesn't mean anything isn't exactly true, because we all know what it means. From listening to the song, we all know what he's saying there. Basically, you got this. Well, the same way when the John intuitively knew the movement you need is on your shoulder. With it, Paul said, no, I'll change that. It doesn't make any sense. A well-known, heartwarming Beatles anecdote. And John said, no, you're not changing that line. That's the best line. And Paul said, it doesn't make any sense. And John said, sure it does. It's great. I get it.
That's right.
He's saying, you got this.
Yeah, that's what John was saying to Paul. Yeah. And I would say this last thing on the whole Jude, not the last thing, but I just wanted to piggyback on what you were saying. I think one of the philosophy professor I interviewed in the book said the great thing about that is there's enough of a separation for the listener that he's not being preached to. He's listening to 2 guys and one guy giving advice to another guy, which Rob Sheffield from Rolling Stone says in my book. It's even more radical a statement because as a young boy, hearing a song with one man talking to another man about something, about picking himself up by his bootstraps, getting over something terrible, finding a woman to let into his skin, let into his heart, was really shocking to him. And he was like, that really changed my viewpoint of how pop music can work. So I think that the fact that Paul does use the second person there to tell his tale, like he does with Rocky Raccoon around the same time on the White Album, telling his tale using a character.
If I'm remembering right, I think you made a point in your book that it's very tricky to do an advice song, a didactic song. And I think it is. Look, it's very, I'm not trying to take a shot at Billy Joel here, believe me, but like the song Tell Her About It, which starts with Listen Boy.
Yeah, very good.
And he's giving advice. And when I hear that, I admit my hackles go up a little and I'm thinking, who made you the expert? And
the comparable song that came to me was We Gotta Get You a Woman, Todd Rundgren.
No, there you go.
Leroy Boy.
And it's funny, Rob Sheffield also uses the B side, Revolution. He calls it the ultimate mansplaining song. It's like, you say you want a revolution? Well, let me tell you about this. I'll tell you what you really want. Do you really want that? As opposed to Paul, who kind of leaves it up to Jude, which is cool because he's writing in it. See, that's what's so great about songwriters, I think, because they put themselves in the character. And Paul was a great character, whether it's Eleanor Rigby, he can take the characters. And he's constantly talking the way you would talk to a young person, someone who naively does not know what they're getting into. That's why John connected to it, because John was striking out on his own to be with Yoko against everything that he felt. Like he still loved Cynthia. I believe that. And obviously he loved his son. And he knew that his father left him when he was 5. He's now doing the same thing to his son, who he pretty much ignored for the right to be a Beatle. And now he hears this song. And in a weird way, it's a song to comfort his son, but he's using it as approbation to leave his wife and go with Yoko. And as we know, Paul is singing the same thing to Linda, Robert, right? I mean, that's kind of what
And that's the thing, just minor point, that by the time the song was written and recorded, he was still with Francie Schwartz officially, because they're the ones that went out and did the guerrilla marketing at the abandoned Apple boutique, Hey Jude Revolution, that got them in trouble with all the Jewish shopkeepers nearby. But Linda was on the cusp. She was certainly in his life at that point, just not the official one yet, because he hadn't finessed it yet.
Yes. And I didn't mean to gloss over that as much, guys, in the book. It's just that it seemed to me that Paul goes from being with Jane Asher for 3 years, 4 years. He was
5.
Was it 5 years?
Longer than that, yeah.
Oh, even, yeah. And through his whole fame, certainly. And lives with her family. And then they're engaged. So, of course, he was with all these other women. And I mentioned it in the book. Paul is a young, handsome, very sought after Beatle, for crying out loud. They're on tour. John Lennon called it Satyricon after the Fellini movie. So obviously, without getting too much into that, but there was, I think, and you're right about that, there were some women overlapping. But to me, these were the women, the other women to Jane. I think Linda is the bridge. I think when he finds Linda, that's it. He knows, because Linda wants to have children with him and she adores him. And I believe, without getting too deeply into psychology, and I talk about his childhood and his love for his mother, but she is kind of the way Yoko was for John, a mother figure, like a kind, caring, not a groupie, not someone who needed something from him per se, a woman who had her own career, but not like Jane, who was kind of could be cold to Paul and not give him the things he wants. And, he was very, very, immature in that way. I think both John, I don't know if you guys agree, but I think John and Paul grew up with these women. They grew up as they became men.
100%.
Totally agree. You mentioned Rob Sheffield, and in Dreaming the Beatles, he had the great insight that he said something along the lines of, no two men ever felt more closely about something than John and Paul did about girls.
Right.
So I do like that if this is the central Beatles song, I do like very much that if the central message is, if you want to get to a better place, find a girl to love. Because in other songs, they might have said it was, listen to the color of your dreams, or,
let me take you down.
Get behind the wall, see behind the wall of illusion. But of course, the central message from both John and Paul was a very coherent, I really need to find a girl, even though it's difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and many ways, Paul, even though he accused John of sabotaging the White House album sessions by bringing Yoko in. And of course, those guys would have been taken aback because, as I said many times in these interviews, it wasn't just women weren't allowed in the studio. No one was allowed in the studio. Brian Epstein wasn't allowed in the studio. It was George Martin, whoever engineered in the Four Beatles, or whoever was playing on the track as far as like a session musician. So the fact that John did that during the White Album sessions, I think opened Paul's eyes. He understood it because that was his buddy and he was going through the same thing. And I think that's why, again, John connected to this song.
I always found it remarkable that they both also chose as the love of their lives eventually these tough, independent, bohemian career women who already had a kid, and then they made them their musical partner. And I always would have thought Linda and Yoko were miles apart. And it was interesting on the Get Back documentary to see them chatting away in the studio. It's like, okay, they had possibly more in common than we might have thought.
Very much so. And I was surprised to find, writing the book, that they both grew up in Scarsdale, obviously 10 years apart. Yoko was older. They both went to the same college at different times, both spent time in Greenwich Village trying to get their careers underway. As you mentioned, they both married successful men, had a daughter, then divorced them to be their own women, both raised by very rich, successful men, and both really American. I mean, Linda, 100% American, and Yoko through Japan, but grew up in America. So, yeah, I think it was Tim Riley, the musicologist and author of several. Tim said, look, they basically married the same person in a way. And also the most intimate thing they could possibly do is create music and make art. And they made sure their wives were doing it with them, which to this day, I can't think. Maybe James Taylor, but James Taylor and Carly Simon kind of were their own thing before they got together. Can you think of another example of something like this where the person makes art with their wives for the rest of their careers?
I know that has aged so well, because I remember when I was a kid in the early 70s, I think, I shared the general feeling towards Paul of what you traded in John Lennon as a musical partner for Linda McCartney. It seemed like a bad trade. at the time. But of course, you look back, and obviously he was just following his heart. And even as he was recording "Hey Jude," and John said when he first heard it, "You're talking to me. You're giving me absolution to go out and be with the person I love." And Paul said, "No, it's me." He had remarkably already decided this woman he had just met was the love of his life, and so she was. An interesting topic, as you had said, this came out during a difficult summer with protests and riots and assassinations, and that it was an antidote to it. But I was only a kid, but I do certainly remember there was a very utopian strain to the 60s. It was a time of communal singing. You could, if you want to start like singing "We Shall Overcome" at the March on Washington in 63, and bookended nicely in November 69, the Vietnam moratorium, singing "Give Peace a Chance."
Right.
So it works pretty well.
In between, you have "All Together" now.
Yeah. And yeah, I was very much a time of communal singing, and I was an impressionable kid. I remember I would hear a song like "Get Together" by the Youngbloods. Come on, people now. And I would honestly think, well, surely if the whole world sings this song, we are headed toward a new time of love and understanding.
Reach out of the darkness.
Yeah, there were contradictory strains in the 60s. It was one damn thing after another. There was a war going on. And at the same time, there were legislative civil rights achievements. Since that, I think a lot of people thought having more sex was a swell idea.
More drugs, yes.
Drugs had an aspect. But also, speaking specifically of the culture the Beatles ushered in, I think a lot of people thought, hey, music is getting better. The Beatles' hairstyle certainly looked better than a crew cut. And I think a lot of guys said, look at these guys growing their hair long and they're getting more girls than Mickey Mantle.
Right. I think you make the best point. My favorite comment about America in the 60s, people forget George Harrison had a sister here, and he went up to Saugerties to visit the band. He went out to Haight-Ashbury to walk around with Patty. Paul had bounced back and forth with the Capitol Records, meeting Linda. John and Paul came here. But Keith Richards and Mick Jagger had come here in 65, I think was the last time they were here before the 69 tour, 66. And those two guys were absolutely, and they use these words, appalled, shocked, and horrified by what the hell happened. Because when they came in 65, 66, there was this blossoming of this youth movement, positive, all love, free this, support that. By 69, of course, the one that ends bloodily in Altamont. Mm-hmm. And there's this, and they have Let It Bleed coming out because they hadn't been here. It's like when you don't see a kid for 2 years, like your nephew or something, and you're like, whoa, have you grown? Yeah. That's kind of how the way Keith, because at least the Beatles were coming back and forth. Keith and Mick had not seen America in a few years, mainly because of Brian's drug problems and his visa problems, but they were stunned. Therein lies the difference between 66 and 68. Because it was all still fun and games and girls and drugs and enlightening your mind and peace and Eastern philosophy. By 68, even the people that were trying to change the world were fighting with each other, whether it was the civil rights movement or the leftist movement or the anti-war movement. No one seemed to be able to agree on anything. It's just incredible to me. But the one thing they did agree with for at least a few months in the summer and fall of 68 was Hey Jude.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a nice little contrast that sets itself up. Street Fighting Man versus Revolution, which if you were heavily into youth movement politics at the time, that very much was a divisive thing where they saw the Beatles as out of touch. What do you mean it's going to be all right? The cops are splitting your head open on the streets of Chicago. It's going to be all right? Is that what you're going to do? Wave your little flower at them? At least the Stones had the good grace to say, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm just not like the Moody Blues would sing later. I'm just a singer in a rock and roll band. But they at least cop to their ineffectualness at that time. Whereas they thought the Beatles were coming off as being Pollyanna at the time when things had gotten deadly dark and serious. And it's like, you guys are so out of touch. You've just made the case for your own irrelevancy, at least with that song. But then Hey Jude, you got on the A side, is the one that calms the waters. Take a step back without beating you over the head with a, as you say, mansplaining directive at that point. It sneaks up on you. You're listening to the song, it's soothing, it's nice, it's pleasant, but it takes you time to absorb the whole of it. I don't know if anyone's ever made the case for their meditation studies and repeating mantras as in any way influencing that coda of that song. But it's certainly the kind of thing through repetition, that is what makes a mantra effective. That is what brings you to that chill point. And so here he is depicting it musically as he would, because he's Paul McCartney. And I don't know if subconsciously that informed the decision making. Well, we're going to do this for 4 minutes now. Or it just, in the moment, that was just the way, well, this is going great and it's building. Let's just keep it going. We're the Beatles. We can get away with it. And by the way, MacArthur Park. So it just made sense in a way that maybe even beyond its creators was the perfect thing at the perfect time.
The whole song is such a beautifully intuitive affair that I'm sure they just kept singing the na-nas because that felt right.
Yeah.
And you see on the rehearsal footage that Ringo is singing it. Ringo probably intuitively understood, oh, everyone's supposed to sing this.
Even Ringo.
And eventually the whole band. Well, of course, there's something to these chanting a repetitive mantra-like chorus that is supposed to bring you to a place of bliss, and it appeals to the kid. Kids love singing the song that never ends. And there's a bunch of examples from the same time, something like Age of Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In, where you do it. It's interesting that, just a silly side note, maybe the most direct response to Hey Jude is Donovan's song Atlantis.
Yeah, somebody mentions that in my book. I believe my friend Dan Byrne, the singer-songwriter. Yeah, he said that was right around that time. And of course, Donovan was in India with the Beatles at the time.
Yeah, and totally in their circle.
I was young enough to think Atlantis was profound and beautiful.
Target audience.
When it came out. And I confess, I still love it because I think it's catchy. And also the fact that his scat singing behind the chorus, you can hear him singing My Antediluvian Baby.
Can I just say something right that you just reminded me of? That is the difference between something like Atlantis and Hey Jude, in a sense where Atlantis seems, and I don't want to use the word dated, but it is of its time and reflects its time. Like if I was going to do a 60s movie, I would think Atlantis would fit perfect, get us right into it. Just like you said before with that
Aquarius.
Song earlier. Yeah, any of those songs, but Hey Jude for some reason transcends that. And I'm wondering, because people brought up Bohemian Rhapsody a lot in my book, just because the length of it and as Robert mentioned, the way it's structured and arranged takes you on this journey.
And Queen does songs like that too.
Correct. Yeah, but it's just this.
We Are the Champions type songs.
Yeah, and these songs are so bombastic that they don't even. Like I said, they don't even have a time period. Like Queen keeps having different lives. I know the movie brought them back, and then Wayne's World in the 90s. I did want to say one thing about what Robert said before, and maybe we'll touch upon this as we go. Mm-hmm. But the arrangement of the song is so brilliant. I really delved deeply, or I tried to figure out, because Paul is such a songsmith. He's a structuralist. He's somebody who can I keep using the word manipulative. He knows how to get those emotions out of you. And it's just every part of the way that's arranged and the way it leads up to that crazy sing-along at the end, that's just longer than the actual song, is just, I can't think of another word, but manipulative. But it's not saccharine. Doesn't have a sentimentality to it. But it definitely reminds me of a Spielberg movie where you just know you're being massaged here, but you can't help it because you're having a blast. And
I don't think it's cynical. I think
not
that
at all. No, yeah.
He knows what he's doing.
It began with him wanting to cheer up John's son. I mean, the song is awash
that way.
Yeah. Awash in good karma. Yes. The way the song layers, just here's a tambourine and here's Ringo, the all-time best king of the tom-tom drum fill. It's funny. I thought about Day in the Life, a very different song, but another song that's been considered maybe the peak of the Beatles' achievement, that begins in an everyday place and goes to a vast place and has a wonderful Ringo drum fill. But other than that, it has a very different feel to it.
Yeah, my second favorite Beatles song. And for everything you said, Ringo very much could be, I would like to hear an alternative, but he might be the most underrated musician in the history of popular music.
I feel like he finally started getting his due a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
The most critical people of him.
Several decades too late. But
it's the non-musicians that are the most critical. And I think it's because they've fallen prey to his image in the Beatle films and in the Beatle cartoons to some extent as like the lucky dummy in the group. Not this worldly adult guy that the Beatles saw in Liverpool and Hamburg when they asked him into the band.
I always feel like drums are kind of like baseball players. I think people see baseball players and they're not these monsters with giant shoulders or these 7-foot guys slamming the ball down. They see guys with little beer guts, you know what I mean? Guys who are small, and they feel like I could be doing this. So the funny thing about drums is everybody can keep, not everybody, but most people can keep time and clap and bang on their desk. And they think I could do this. I don't have to learn melody or notes or anything. So they see Ringo doing this and they're like, God, because that's a band that has John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and even George Harrison in it. And here's Ringo. He comes up fourth every time. And I really do believe, and Rob Sheffield brought it up in my book. I mean, I could name 10 Beatles songs off the top of my head right now that would not be nearly as good without Ringo Starr playing on them. Not nearly as good.
100%.
I think Tim Riley said something about Ringo, like he reminds us of the virtues of being ordinary. But
thank God for that.
Well, every Beatle fan knows the story of, I guess the take on the record was they took like a 10-minute walk over to Trident Studios, right, from Apple, and the first take, correct?
It's the first take of the 4 takes
when they rolled the tapes. And of course, everyone knows the story of Paul started the take and Ringo was in the bathroom and kind of came out and got there just in time to do the drum fill, which I guess, again, continuing the theme of good karma, put Paul in a good mood. Like, oh, okay, he got there with exactly a second to spare. Let's make this a good take.
Yeah, I think Paul says, I can't screw this up now. This is the magic take. I've got to,
And just a quick, I was reminded of that. It's funny watching, again, the Get Back documentary, those great moments when they're playing in the studio and the caption would appear, "This is the take."
Cool, right? Yeah.
It's on the record. And of course, you even listening, our ears are so attuned that we go like, oh, wait, I think this is it, isn't it? And then the caption would appear. But specifically, the B-side of Don't Let Me Down. Do you remember this? They're just doing Don't Let Me Down, just another run through of it. Mal Evans is like pouring big glasses of wine for everybody. Linda and Heather are sitting on the floor playing and stuff like that. And the caption appears, "This is the take." And it's like, don't you people, you pouring the wine, you playing on the floor, don't you realize something immortal is being created at this very second?
That's true.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. If the Beatles taught us anything, it's that there is always something better in life for us if we seek it out. George was fond of quoting, "For the forest to be green, each tree must be green." That's just another way of saying, for the world to become a better place, each of us has to put our own house in order. BetterHelp is a group of professional therapists providing help online. Traditionally, there's been a stigma attached to getting help or even admitting that you could use it, but that's fading more and more. With BetterHelp, it's never been easier to get help geared to the needs of the individual, both in terms of how you can connect, by video, voice calls, chats, or messages, as well as finding a therapist suited to you, worldwide. With BetterHelp, you can find peace of mind on your own terms. If you act now, you can get 10% off your first month. Just go to betterhelp.com/satby. Again, that's BetterHelp, not health, but help, like the song and the film, .com/SATB.
You talked about the layering of the instruments, just the tambourine, the Ringo full, the background Oz, the wonderful moment when John comes in, the acoustic guitar getting more and more, and then eventually the whole world is singing and the orchestra comes in and all that. And I would analogize it to like maybe you've been to a Christmas Eve service where somebody at the front of the church lights a candle and takes it and lights somebody in the front pew.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And they pass it around. And it's a nice thought. And like a didactic song, though, these are difficult to pull off because by 1970, they were doing the Coke ad. I'd like to teach the world to sing and stuff.
Yeah, that's when you know you're influenced, when when Madison Avenue gets a hold of this idea.
Yeah, and even my 9-year-old self was thinking, this is getting a little corny. Then by 1972, 73, I think Ray Stevens of Guitarzan and Ahab the Arab won the Grammy for Everything Is Beautiful.
Right, that's right. Of the Streak fame, I had that 45 when I was a kid.
Beating out James Taylor,
Yeah,
Elton John, Ray Stevens, and even my 12-year-old self was saying, "Oh, come on, that song's hokey."
That's true.
But how did they do it? Well, you want to talk about Paul singing just a little in that song? Well, we were talking about Ringo being ordinary. Let's move from that to the extraordinary.
Good segue.
It's a gorgeous vocal. I did want to say, just to to echo what you said before about the candles, I describe Hey Jude, and I really do believe this now after spending a year with it and discussing everything I did, that it is a secular gospel song. It's got gospel phrasing. It's got the double amen cadence at the end, the 3 chords he sings. And that vamping he does at the end is very, very reminiscent of the kind of vamping you'd get in 9-10 minute gospel songs where people are feeling the spirit kind of thing. That gets us to the wonderful vocal by Paul, who uses melisma that you would find in gospel songs at certain points. He doesn't overdo it the way it would become sort of the thing in soul songs in the 90s and afterwards, but the kind of thing that Marvin Gaye would hint at, and certainly Sam Cooke, the people that Paul revered. And he was just a huge fan of that style. His vocal in this is totally understated, but beautifully done. And because he's a melody machine and because he wrote this thing and he understands where it's going, there is a big part, I believe, that plays in his ability to vocalize it well. Just about better than anybody, really. Not just for this song, but what Paul does to all songs when he creates them.
Well, it starts out, the singing is so simple and unadorned and immediate. And even the first line, just the "Hey Jude," is a conversational thing to say. Mm-hmm. Then I think you called it the turning point of the song when he goes, and don't you know it's just you, when he shoots his voice up. And that reminded me of nothing so much as "Lend Me Your Comb" from the BBC sessions, when he sings about, baby, it's getting late. Believe it or not, I feel strongly about this. And I love drawing parallels from,
sure,
late Beatles stuff.
Well, he had this bag of tricks, right? They all did. And it's so cool to see it within a single recording. Basically, the entire range of Paul McCartney as a vocalist.
Correct.
Everything.
Yes.
The soft ballad singing all the way to the Little Richard whoops in the ad-libbing, the vamping at the end. It's just unbelievable.
First time in the studio on "P.S. I Love You." I'm sorry to interrupt, but when he scats, I want you to remember, and you're thinking, remember, a key word in "Hey Jude."
Right.
Yeah. But listen to that, "Lend Me Your Comb," and McCartney's remarkable ability to sort of smooth out a sudden change in register up to a bluesy.
Oh yes. Yes,
passage.
There are great. That's why I think this is everything the Beatles do well. Everything Paul does well. Certainly, it's his composition, and even John said it's finest composition. And John said he did nothing to it. Which, as you know, over the years, both of them argued about who did what in My Life or who did what in Eleanor Rigby. But in this case, it was a Paul vehicle. But then again, a great band song, and it just the fact that the Beatles, the oohs, those great oohs, that remind me of what inspired Brian Wilson to do Pet Sounds, and just that John's wonderful. I think Tim Riley points out in my book, it's the first time, if not only time, John goes above him for that harmony. And we just talked about the brilliance of Ringo and just how the band is doing what the Beatles did really well. And that is to serve the song. When George went to Saugerties to visit the band and he came back and he said, "These guys are doing what we need to do. This is the thing, this is what we used to do, and we're doing psychedelic stuff." And so when the world started to shift in 68 and go back to just playing, guitars and drums and getting a band again back together, this is what the Beatles do well. It's what they always did well. So that's what I love about this song too. In essence, it's sort of a sonic history or overview or composite idea of what the Beatles are musically.
Not just serving the song, but enacting the theme of the song. The same way "A Little Help from My Friends," Ringo is receiving it as he sings about it, and just that Paul is saying, you don't have to do this alone. And here are his bandmates coming in and backing him up. Credit to Tim Riley again. I think he finished Tell Me Why saying something like the great metaphor of the Beatles is the possibility of interactions between people. That they changed the paradigm of a rock and roll where, with Elvis, it's like, okay, the guy's better looking and sings better and moves better than everybody. I can't do that. And the Beatles made a lot of people think, oh, maybe if I got some friends and we got together.
Yeah. Yes.
We could do this. And just in McCartney's specific case, certainly no slouch in the singing or the looks department, who likely could have been a first-rate pop star, instead chose to throw in with 3 others, split the songwriting credits, do 38% of the singing instead of all the singing. And as a result, became, the world's favorite thing.
I think that's a really big aspect of their appeal that maybe isn't discussed enough, is this egalitarian spirit that they projected, that we're all just guys of equal talents that sort of together make this great blend that sort of cancel each other's weaknesses and enhance each other's strengths and make it look fun, that you can identify, hey, I have fun with my friends. What if we took up instruments? We could be doing that too. Made it look not daunting. That's the thing that is incredibly challenging and sophisticated as we know even their early songs to be. They didn't come off in a way that seemed out of reach to the people that were then inspired to take up instruments or form bands or grow their hair after first seeing the Beatles. And that's a remarkable thing to influence the culture, to set all that energy and give it a direction. What a profound thing, despite themselves.
Well said. And listen, Michael Lindsay Hogg's video for that song brought that spirit back, because that's how people remembered the Beatles. And they hadn't seen them unless you went on one of those crazy tours, or even if you happen to be in San Francisco in 66. No one had ever seen the four of them together in one place, except for a few videos and things like that, playing a song the way they did with Hey Jude in that video. It brought sort of people back to the, and it's the joy of it. The joy of the four guys, that kind of look like they're in a club. They're all dressed the same. I'm going back to 64 now, of course. Yeah. Same haircuts and boots, looking like they're having a blast. It's funny about the Beatles. They are an entity unto themselves. I think you get more of the history or the progression of rock and roll from the Stones than you do from the Beatles. Because in a sense, the Stones had that kind of, we hate life. This is stupid, what we're doing. Everything's rotten, but we're having a good time. We're having sex and drugs. I mean, that is everything you see through the punk movement, to the 70s movement, to the rock and roll. You know what I mean? It's like, that's what you get from rock and roll. It's like, screw you to the world, right? The Beatles were never about that, ever. It was like, this is so much fun being with my friends. They were always smiling and bowing together. There's something very communal. And that's why when they do the video for Hey Jude and everybody sees those four guys again, it's like, look at them. There they are. Okay.
There they are.
I know.
The world is fine again.
You would never guess they had 16 months left, would you?
No, you sure wouldn't.
No. And that's a great point, because that's what I love about Hey Jude too. And this is stuff I didn't discover, guys, until I was working on the book. It just dawned on me, and of course, dawned on me through interviewing these brilliant people who contributed. But this idea that after that, you could make a very, very good graph of this with occasional ups and downs. But this is where Hey Jude is. Let's get to Sgt. Pepper's. Anybody who's not watching this on video, my hand is up. And then there's a plateau, because they never did anything bigger. They were the biggest thing on the planet. Everybody thought they were gods with Sgt. Pepper, right? Then they did Magical Mystery Tour, and they had some failures. There was some personal problems with, Brian and everything dying and all these things. And then they plateau, and then they come out with Hey Jude, and there's that little bit of a bump of, remember us? We're great. We're the Beatles. Everything's going to be fine. We're the biggest thing on the planet. And then there's that slow erosion that you never really see, because I don't think even people who heard Abbey Road thought that it was over. How could you listen to that record? Even the solemn endings of "You Never Give Me Your Money" or "Carry That Weight." I mean, that album is like, they're at the peak of their powers. It's like, why would they ever break up? Which is one of the reasons why people kept saying, "You guys going to stop this solo crap and get back together already?"
Right.
It drove them crazy, but you understand why? Because it was like Joe DiMaggio retiring after 10 years. He was the best player on the planet, and then he's like, you know what? I'm just going to marry Marilyn Monroe and go about my beat. And people were like, what? Why would you do that? So I think that's a big part of why people. You're right. I don't think anybody in a million years would have seen something like that and thought, wow, this thing's got a shelf life.
Well, a couple of things. You mentioned Spielberg before, and after Sgt. Pepper, when the world was saying, you guys are messengers, you are
the biggest thing,
divine beings, show us the way forward. An unfair request, and they did it.
They did it anyway.
With Hey Jude. That reminds me of nothing so much as Spielberg was on an incredible role there, around 1982. And it's like, okay, how are you going to top yourself? Comes out with E.T., pretty much the best fantasy since The Wizard of Oz, maybe, and it's like when somebody does that, you really tip your hat. That's how legends are made.
I love the fact, if I may, I'm sorry to interrupt, that real quick, I love the fact that the Beatles have a finite period. The 60s. They become famous in the 60s. They had done in the 60s. 1970, they're done. And when you look back at them as somebody, as a historian or an author or podcaster or whatever, you have this pocket of stuff. Like, what do you do? I'm a Stones guy. I've always been a Stones guy. I like the Stones more than the Beatles. It's just me. We could go into that, whatever. But the point is, what parts of the Stones? I mean, there's 15 parts. I mean, not the fact that they're still going and they're a legacy band, but even they're a blues cover band, then they're a pop band, then they go into the psychedelic, then they're like stripped down country rock band, then they go into the 70s as this heroin chic rock, then they become this corporation. It's like so many sections. The Beatles, you have the moments but the era is boxed in. You could see the arc. It's like a great Homer story. It's a great Dickens novel. There's an arc to these characters and this thing.
Absolutely. Very well said.
Or it's like James Dean or Marilyn Monroe. I mean, not to be ghoulish, but forever young and beautiful.
Yeah. But you don't get the feeling, if I may, you don't get the feeling, those people you feel like, oh, crap. James Dean could have been a great actor when he was 50. That's what I feel about Jimi Hendrix. I feel like it was stolen. I think two of the most important figures that were stolen from us are Buddy Holly and Jimi Hendrix. I think those two guys had so much more to give. I get the feeling that the Beatles gave everything they could, and they were like, thank you, good night. And that's a nice thing,
I don't feel there's an incompleteness to the
Correct.
Beatles catalog, though
Right.
Robert has convinced me over the last year or two that they didn't have to break up. So.
Well, I temper that with, I think on the one hand, they had more gas left in their tank, and there's nothing I would listen to solo of theirs I thought couldn't be improved by having another Beatle or two on it. But in terms of maintaining that place in our lives, perhaps it was better that it came to an end, as James is suggesting, sort of bookending the 60s, because then they're of that era before they decayed, before their collective power diminished or was diffused. I would have liked to have seen them, if they want to do their little solo excursions, come back to the mothership every couple of years and do some amazing Beatle thing. But I think it would have been impossible to maintain the position they'd held for all of the 60s. And maybe it would have made us sad to see it subsumed by a Kiss or a Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin or something like that. There's the Beatles at number 10, peaking at 10 or something. We wouldn't have wanted to see that.
Or declining musically, like watching Willie Mays play center field for the Mets in 1973, or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar playing 1 year too much. Or the greatest example is their buddy Muhammad Ali, who was a god to me when I was a kid. One of the things that affected me more than anything else when I was a kid was Ali losing to Spinks. Frazier, I understand. But when he lost to Spinks, it's like my childhood was ripped out from under me. And there's this invincibility that the Beatles never bequeathed. They never got, because I just mentioned the Stones again. You got the Brian Jones era, he dies. Then you got the Mick Taylor era, and then you got the Ron Wood era. There's no eras. I just finished reading Stephen Hyden's brilliant book on Pearl Jam, which is called The Long Road, and it's very well done. He's a good friend, and I hope everybody checks that book out. But if you're a fan of Pearl Jam, certainly. But those guys have had 4 or 5 drummers. They've gone through these periods. You don't really get that. Maybe U2. I mean, there are very few bands that actually still, the Beatles are the Beatles. And just like Robert just said, if you take any song off of Ram, you take any song off of Imagine, you take even songs off of All Things Must Pass, there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of those that would have been excellent and could have been Beatles songs. So they wrote them when they were with the Beatles.
Right.
And you just get the feeling that they could have gone on, but the fact that they didn't, like I said before with my DiMaggio analogy, you never have to wonder. You saw DiMaggio at his best, and you never saw him stumbling around center field for the 73 Mets. You saw him at his peak. And that's the way the Beatles come across to me, is like they're infallible. This is one of the reasons why the Let It Be crowd, when I used to go to see the Midnight movie, when I saw the Let It Be in like 79, 80, 81, all my friends were appalled. They hated it. They were like, oh my God, this is like seeing the Wizard of Oz as some fat guy from Kansas. I don't want to see this, but I was intrigued by it. I loved it because there were people and they were making songs and they were arguing, and that was cool for me. But a lot of people, they wanted to see Beatlemania. They wanted to see
the magic.
That dispelled the magic. But the Beatles built that magic. And being a kid growing up in the 70s, I feel like I'm the second generation Beatle fan. I didn't know them when they were the Beatles.
Right.
Paul McCartney and Wings and the Beatles were kind of this. In my experience with that Band on the Run and Let It Be, were kind of in the same ballpark. That seems sacrilegious to someone who grew up in the 60s, but at least for that period, the Beatles are mystical. And anything that bursts that bubble, people get crazy about that. Crazy.
That's an interesting phenomenon, because even now, you would think I'm steeped to the gills in Beatles and everything, the official and unofficial and all that stuff. I've stayed away from Get Back in recent months, having saturated myself with it the first few months it came out. But I dip my toe back in every once in a while. And I'm astonished at myself sitting there watching maybe just 20 minutes of it, how it can make me emotional just watching them interact.
I got emotional watching that too.
Yeah. Why does it have that power?
That's a good idea. Yeah, well, I'm full of ideas like that. Some famous sort of literary Beatle, you know. Into the craft.
Well, we had mentioned John's liking The Movement You Need Is on Your Shoulder, the Beatles singing along behind Ringo, the high note at the end of
Little Help.
Little Help. And I thought Get Back had another great moment when Ringo said, I want to go up on the roof. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
Just that was just very, George was going, I don't want to do it and all that sort of thing. And Ringo's being quiet as usual and just says, I want to go up on the roof. And you could tell that was
that's the tipping
them
point
towards it. Well, look, we've mentioned Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, and Joe DiMaggio. So I'm going to analogize something to Nolan Ryan. Okay. Well, we had gotten into Paul's singing. We got off on another tack before we hit the better.
Yes.
Wow, that high F. Robert and I talked on an earlier podcast about McCartney's remarkable range, but being able to sing a high F is like being able to throw 100 miles an hour. It's just very few guys can do it.
Yeah.
And I would have thought that's just how McCartney's ability to not just hit, but to actually sing those notes is a secret sauce throughout, going back to You Really Got a Hold on Me and Day Tripper and Nowhere Man and The Word. Listen to these songs and you'll see that just to increase the excitement, build the timber, late in the song, Paul will go up and hit a note around a high C just to change the texture. What can you say? It's one of the great instruments in rock, that voice. And I had always thought that F, that's probably about the highest note in a Beatles song. But he's actually whooping a lot of high Gs in stuff like I'm Down and Long Tall Sally and Kansas City. He hits a high A in Twist and Shout and Oh Darling. But at 4:39, during the na-nas, when he does that, I believe that's a B flat. It's almost hard to identify it as a note. So I'm calling that the
highest note.
The highest note.
That's good. I should have put that in my book. I was going to say that the thing about Paul is
wasn't long enough, that book. Thank
you very much. I almost put in, one thing I was going to put in the book, but they were like, okay, you got to stop, is I researched and I found, I think 200 and some odd, so almost 200 songs that had na-nas in them, 4 or 5 or 6 of them prior to Hey Jude, and then so many.
Hey, goodbye. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. But I was going to say, you mentioned something about, I don't want to get away from the singing. The thing about Paul, one of the things I discovered in the book, and I think is absolutely true, is when She Loves You, which to me is the quintessential early Beatles song. And then I Want to Hold Your Hand, as far as like the band really, and I Want to Hold Your Hand is what made them in America. Those high notes, those androgynous high notes, otherworldly. We've talked about that. And also the yeahs, the na-na-nas. And the fact that you have another song in which you have a young man talking to another man about a woman. It's just, the connections are amazing. But I loved, and a few of the musicologists talked about this, and historians and Beatle guys, they would talk about the Beatles constantly commenting on themselves. I think somebody recently just did either a podcast or some sort of a piece or an essay on Beatles songs that comment on what the Beatles are doing. It's weird, either about fame or being taxed, Glass Onion, or about how people perceive them, or fame. And it's one of those things, again, I feel that Hey Jude is this culmination of everything that they built up through there. And that high F, as you mentioned, that very high note that's just, it separates the song, it cracks the song in half.
Yep.
Is just another example of that. And it just reminds me of Paul in Hamburg learning how to do the whoos from Little Richard, all that stuff. I get chills when I think about it.
Oh, yeah. God, yeah. They weren't known for their improvisational skills terribly, the Beatles. It's like everything is very tightly arranged, apart from the Little Richard isms that they throw into the early stuff. But the fact that he's got to vamp over 4 minutes of that song, and he pulls it off, and you see the rehearsals, and I don't quite think I reached it yet. That wasn't the one, or whatever he says, that he knows that he's building towards something, but then when it counts, he nails it. And then, okay, fine, you've got the take that's going to be released. Then he's got to do that with that live vocal under Michael Lindsay Hogg's direction for the promo films. And I love that one that surfaced, I think, when the Beatles' One video collection came out, where suddenly he's quoting the band, The Weight, in his improv.
Right, yeah. He does. That's right. I gotta find that. I forgot about that. That's not on the YouTube version.
No, it's not on YouTube, but it's in the alternate that I don't think we saw until that package came out. It's like, holy shit, that's amazing. It just reminded me of like, okay, so this is what they did in Hamburg. They had 6-hour sets they had to fill, and they're like throwing everything they know at the audience. You know, we got these 2-minute rock and roll songs that are maybe a minute and a half because we're on speed. And what are we going to do to fill that space up? And so I know, we'll just incorporate every bit of song that fits that we can throw into this. And it's like, there's an example of it, a latter day example of it. And it's just so cool.
And I did learn from Michael Lindsay Hogg, which I never knew and I never read anywhere else, that they had 3 or 4, they had, I think, 3 different audiences. They would bring them out. Then they had to change the reels on the film stock. And the Beatles would play. They played Motown songs and old blues songs and whatever, and they vamped it up, and they were getting a huge kick. And I love this because Michael Lindsay had told me this. And then, of course, Peter Jackson gives an homage to Hey Jude, which is the end of his 4.5-minute, like, sort of opening thing to tell you where we're at by the time we get to the Get Back sessions. That Hey Jude, it twofold, Hey Jude inspired that. Number one, the Beatles were recording this thing in front of an audience for the first time in God knows how long. Right. And they were loving it. They were loving it. And they were looking at each other going, that's kind of why we got into this thing in the first place, right? And then secondly, they had this idea that they wanted to do a concert, but they also wanted cameras to show them not goofing around or on a bus or reading someone else's lines, doing the thing they do the best, which is play songs, write songs, rehearse songs, be the Beatles. So it's great how Hey Jude was really sort of the impetus for what happened. And then Michael Lindsay Hogg was the guy to direct that footage.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing because you can sort of see how that experience and what you're seeing on camera, what you're seeing on the screen of them unscripted, reacting to the audience around them, this incredible inclusivity that they crafted for a song of universal appeal. So they knew that much, that we want to have all the food groups represented in this thing. And so they do. And the thing that they didn't count on was how they would react to it and how that gets the wheels turning, especially in Paul, because he's the idea guy at that point, of how we can turn this into something. And John and Yoko might be thinking, oh, yes, a happening. And so they booked the Roundhouse, and that originally was going to be their thought. And then it ends up being, no, we got to film this. I've watched these documentaries, watching painters paint and things like that. We've got to get us in the act of creation. So guess what, boys? All new songs.
Yeah, it's amazing. And listen, that's why I named the chapter, the very brief history of the Beatles, Let It Out and Let It In. You know, I tried to use quotes from the song to show the lineage of that. But the Beatles got as much out of Beatlemania to the point where they had to quit. It was too much. They got as much out of their audience and their times and their world. They were very, very aware, which they taught future bands to be. Be aware of your audience. Don't repeat yourself. Don't cheat your audience or give your audience what they need or what they want. But then when they sat and did that and they saw the audience, once again, they were feeding off it and saying, oh, okay, this is as much for us as it is for them. So you're making an excellent point there. And I think that I see that a lot in Get Back. The perfect example of that is Billy Preston. When Billy Preston shows up, who happened to be in Hamburg in 1959, 60, 61, when they're playing there, according to legend, Little Richard just left him there and he was hanging out with the Beatles to see their old chum, a guy they respected the hell out of, who again comes from gospel, Southern African-American roots. When he walks in, he's the audience. No, they're on their best behavior. He's great as a musician. You can see their faces going, oh my God, this guy's kicking ass. But it's really about them being the Beatles. They stopped sniping at each other and they start being the Beatles again. I love that.
Snap
yes,
two.
When Billy Preston plays the lick he plays throughout, I've Got a Feeling, for the first time.
Oh, so good.
Paul just like, it's only a second.
He does, but he notices it. Yep.
And when they're on the rooftop, they look at each other and they are sharing that expression that they have at the Hey Jude taping of like, can you believe the sound we're making?
Yeah, this is what we do. Right. And that's, it's funny because my favorite of the Rooftop, which because of it not being in Let It Be, I had never seen before. The first time they play Get Back, when they kick it to Billy, they all leave their feet, except Ringo, of course. That is the cool. Go watch that again. I'm sure you guys, you're nodding your head, so I know you guys know what I'm talking about. But if people have not seen that, I rewound that 5 times when I watched that with a bunch of people. I'm like, did you just see that? The 3 jaded, burnt out, been there, done that, seen everything Beatles are kicking it to Billy Preston, and they're so excited that this guy's going to play on their damn record. They leave their feet. All three of them jump up at the same time. It was the coolest that they were like 16 again.
Yeah, when they're trading the guitar solos on the end, I think it's the same thing. Just A to D, A to D, A to D.
They love it.
And they are letting you know by the way they're playing, we still love this stuff.
And we're good at it.
The most basic stuff, right? We were talking about Paul's F cracking the song open, and just the miraculous thing about the song that I give anything to hear it again for the first time, but that's impossible, is that I always felt, even when I was a kid hearing it on the radio, that we're getting two songs for one with this. Mm-hmm. We all realize how the song is building to the na-na. You know, and we all know it, and we're all feeling it, and we all have that excitement throughout. How much the two sides of the song need each other. Here's a goofy mental exercise for you. Have you ever thought, what if they just finished the song a little after 3 minutes? Uh-huh. That's long enough to be a single. How would you do it? You know, nice melody, good song. Everyone loves it. You could finish it. I honestly made like a good faith effort. Like, okay, how would you end that? Would you go back to just Paul and the piano at the start and have him singing, you can start to make it better, bum, bum, bum.
Yeah, like Let It Be.
Or a dignified Martha, My Dear type ending. Or does everyone sing together? Then you can start to make it better. Thank you. Horn honk, like the end of All Together Now, or Bungalow Bill, or
Sure.
Obla-di-obla-da.
Yes, you need those two parts.
And
those two parts.
Right. And you try it, even making your best effort. How could you have ended it there?
Dun, 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 and just let it hang. It would have been missing something. It's like when you listen to Let It Be Naked.
Everything.
Yeah. When you listen to Let It Be Naked album, just as a minor corollary, and they take the coda off of Get Back, it ends at a ooh, and it doesn't do the and come back in. Yeah, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it doesn't, and it's just very frustrating. So we're informed by almost 60 years of hearing Hey Jude with that coda, that magnificent coda. But I think even at 68, they would have thought, oh, okay, well, that's nice, Paul. Next.
I got two quickies there. The first one is when I heard the Let It Be Naked, which I was very much looking forward to, because I'd heard, oh my God, and there's some things, there's a lot of treacle on there by Phil Spector. But I got to tell you, I missed the string arrangements and the voices in Long and Winding Road. Paul hates it. Other people hate it. I'm like, this is boring now.
It's a demo.
I think Phil Spector did a great job on that song. There's a couple of things on that record, like the John Lennon song, Across the Universe. It's chaos. There's a lot of stuff going on there I'm not a big fan of. But for that, I really do, to your point, having heard it that way that all the time, I would have, totally missed it. And there was one other thing I was going to bring up, but I can't remember now. But that was a biggie for me. I couldn't imagine that song without it. When I got it that way, I was terribly disappointed.
Right.
So, yeah. And everybody in my book says, almost every songwriter kept referring to that ending as the payoff. Paul continues to give us hints something's coming. So, as you mentioned, it's hard to not hear something have the same ears for the first time.
Right.
But that's the other thing I was going to remember. Somebody had told me when I was doing this book tour, some guy came up to me and said, my father told me when he heard this on the radio for the first time, he thought it was just na 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 because he turned the radio on. They were doing that, and it was so long. He figured there's no way this is a coda. It's the song, and he ran around telling everyone about the new Beatles song called Na Na Na, where they don't sing any words. And then eventually he heard the Hey Jude. He's like, what the hell's this? So it's a classic example of turning the radio on at the wrong time. But it was perfectly fine for him. He thought that was great, just the na-nas. So
that's cool. In an earlier era, maybe they would have split it. Hey Jude Part 1 and Part 2. It split it over two sides.
Yeah, it's like American Pie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is Part 1 and Part 2. And I want to use why not? Because we're going there. Spielberg analogy again. Jaws is two different films. You get two films for one. You get the terrorized town, and then you get the three guys going out on the boat.
The hunt, yeah.
So I wonder if you just end the movie with that. And then you're like, wow, you missed. Or you could have a whole movie of those guys out there just fishing. That's a movie in itself. But you need both of those things to work for it to be a brilliant piece of art. Yeah.
Well, from the transcendent to the trivial, one thing I somehow hadn't known is that you can hear John at 2:53 or something say effing hell.
Yeah. And you can't unhear it once you hear that.
No, I can't unhear it. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. Yes. And I love the different, I have heard that isolated now so many times, because I've been on quite a few of these podcasts where the person will play it for me and be like, are you sure that's not Paul? And sometimes I'm like, that kind of sounds like Paul. But I think Mark Lewison, who I talked to, I got him to confirm this. He wasn't officially on record in my book, but he was a great godfather of it. And I met him officially at Chicago Beatle Fest this summer, and we talked about it. And he absolutely thinks that it's what I concluded, which is because it happens when it happens, that John, because Paul changes, let her into your heart, let her under your skin, let her into your heart again, that John did Skin and just messed up and just said, and whatever. And I marvel at the fact that they left it in there and nobody
picked up on it
at all.
It was there as an audio artifact. It caught your ear. You're not expecting in a million years you're going to be hearing what you are hearing on a Beatle record, right?
That's
you're not
true.
you're not expecting that.
It just goes in the barely overheard file on what goes on when Ringo sings, "Tell me why," and way in the background you can hear John say, "We already told you why."
I gotta
referring to
look
the song,
again.
"Tell me why." That and also in "Good Day Sunshine" when Paul sings, "She feels good." You can hear John say, "It feels good," just on the beat.
Especially now with these new mixes. I will say the cool thing about this is that has there been the question, and I this is not rhetorical, I'll ask you guys, has there been a band anywhere that has been dissected, their tracks played backwards, forwards? So you had the Paul is Dead thing, you had the Charles Manson thing, and these things still fall by the wayside. It's incredible how they do. And that's the thing. They're just, because they have this small composite, brilliant career. I often said Elton John from 1969 to 1976. That's the greatest run next to the Beatles. 2 albums a year, all fantastic, packed with brilliant songs, ballads, rockers, tough songs, folk songs, gospel songs, big hits. I mean, that's an amazing run right there. But then you have Elton for another 45 years.
He should have broke up right then and there.
He tried.
Right.
He tried.
Well,
he got rid of the band and got rid of Bernie, and then it was terrible. But yes,
you're quite right that we lost Buddy Holly tragically. But then again, Bob Dylan and Paul Simon, and Elton John. All these guys are still around.
Yes.
It's for some reason, to some degree, rock stars are like athletes and do their best stuff when they're ambitious and driven and have 6% body fat. They're in their 20s.
And you have to remember too, one of the things that really, really resonated with me when I was working on this book in 1968, we're only about 14, 15 years at best in rock and roll. That's it. People didn't know what the hell is going on. The idea that you could be a rock and roller at 30 years old seems stupid. It's stupid. Why would you even? Because all the guys that those guys grew up with were already gone, and they were way younger than guys that have been in bands now. Fall Out Boy, for crying out loud. Even bands that have only been around for 15 years now, back then, it was verboten because Little Richard quit to be a preacher. Buddy Holly died, as we mentioned. Elvis went into the army, then did a bunch of movies. People didn't do rock and roll past 30. So the Beatles at this point were pushing in that. And it's funny because when they do break up, John and Ringo are 30, or Ringo's just 30 and John's about to be 30, right? And Paul's still in his 20s and George is still in his 20s. They never get to 30. That's another one, guys. They kept it within that structured period where people are still great. Now, obviously, I think Ram is one of the greatest albums ever made. I think it's almost as good as a Beatle album, but it's not a Beatle album. And Paul did not do it with the Beatles. So the Beatles are still their own thing. And that's, again, very cool.
Well, they were so young. And my point about rock stars tend to hit their peak in their 20s is we really shouldn't look to them for wisdom.
Right. And yet we do.
And yet we do. And yet, in the case of Hey Jude, it's justified. Listening to it and thinking about it and reading your book, it makes me think, how did we ever think McCartney was an insubstantial?
Thank you.
Or a lightweight lyricist?
Never understood that. Ever Now, it's because Paul went there, right? He did things like Honey Pie. He did things like Silly Love Songs and Your Mother Should Know. He played around. He wasn't self-serious. And that became a thing in the 70s. How serious people could be. Jackson Browne, James Taylor,
authenticity,
Neil Young. Yeah. Paul, I love the fact that Paul did Silly Love Songs. Not only is it a great song, but he's making fun of himself. He made a big hit. But it's also great. Paul's being great, and he's being light. He's not saying, I'm the great Paul McCartney. How dare you make fun of me? I mean, he
What's
even
wrong with
took
that?
What's wrong with that? Even in the lyrics. I love that. And then
he should have called the album Pizza and Fairy Tales.
And Paul's profound statements, like in Hey Jude, like in, the love you take equal to the love you make, they age better than many. I mean, even something like All You Need Is Love, or again, great song, like Let It Be, a great song.
But dated. But in its own time. And a little
overly
too
optimistic.
Too grandiose. I make the point in the book, and I love John, but John tended towards, with everything he did, whether it was Elvis, whether it was Yoko, whether it was Brian Epstein, whether it was the Maharishi, he was completely floored by the fact that Maharishi didn't have the answer to life. He was stunned and disappointed. Nobody else was. Paul was like, Ringo's like, the food sucked. George is like, I'm helping myself. I know. But John's like, this guy's not God. What the hell? So
I've been had.
All you need is love, imagine, give peace a chance. These are grandiose, I'm all in statements. Even some revolution. Paul was never like that. And I think a lot of people, look, the reason why Paul got as much crap, let's call a spade a spade. Jan Wenner didn't like him and loved John. Because Rolling Stone was the voice, especially here in America, and they panned everything Paul did. I listened to Ram for the first time in the early 80s. That's when I got introduced to it. And I remember reading back to the old reviews and I'm like, excuse me, what? People think this sucks? Maybe you think it's not as good as the Beatles, or you don't like what the direction he's going. But the idea that this record sucks is insane. That to me is just purely personal hatred. And that's really, and I'm sorry, that's just a fact, to the point where I think Rolling Stone just buried Paul, no pun intended. And I think he never really came back from that. And quite frankly, because Paul was in love and he was having a damn good time and he was selling a shit ton of records, I don't think Paul cared. He didn't try to do anything like appease any of these idiots. He did whatever the hell he wanted to do. And I think it's unfair, completely unfair. Agreed. That's my diatribe. Sorry.
I think the vindication has come for him to enjoy it.
Agreed.
Yeah, he sold out Dodger Stadium 3 years ago. So.
Yeah. And Ram has
pretty
become
successful.
Yes, and Ram has become a classic now. People consider it one of the great albums from an ex-Beatle, and they're right.
Mm-hmm. So one thing we haven't talked a whole lot about to this point on the song is George, because of course we know that his contribution that he floated was the answering guitar lines, country style, which you talk about in the book, that were immediately shot down. And then you see the rehearsal footage of them for that Experiment TV video where he's kind of banished to the recording console booth and watching them on the studio floor. I always found it endlessly fascinating, while never seeing any direct commentary from him, the fact that he saves it all up till the Beatles are done, puts out All Things Must Pass. Here we go with Isn't It a Pity, a Beatle reject that is clocked into 1 second short of Hey Jude, got the first 3 minutes, then the 4-minute Na 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 coda at the end. And then not only does he do that, with the answering guitar lines, of course, but then he does it again on side 4, as if to say, see, Paul, there's more than one way to do a good song.
Yes, I think George was very hurt by that. Although I will say, again, I mentioned in the book, where the Beatles at in 68 is different than they were in January of 69, because George had enough. The famous, I'll do anything you want me to do, which he had said before to Paul, but in a much more vindictive way. I think he was hurt by that. Paul was right about it. I mean, it's a musical decision, and it is his song. And I think somebody pointed out that George got the last laugh because he put an answering guitar line in either Real Love or Free as a Bird. And with Paul having to play on the record with him instead of
Jeff Lynne says it's okay, so there.
Yeah, it's at that. And the only reason Jeff Lynne's sitting in there is because of George Harrison. So
totally,
George,
right.
And I want to ask you guys this. I've never brought this up in any podcast, but I really feel like you guys can help me answer this. I really kind of feel, I really do believe this. George was done being a Beatle at the end of 64. I think they're dragging Paul. I mean, there are moments where George is enjoying himself, but I think the whole fantasy, fun, this is great stuff, completely it leaves him in 65 before even they make Help. I really do believe that. His songs,
I think the fun part is for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think maybe where he clocked out might have been 66, where he literally says after they leave the stage after Candlestick.
Oh yeah, he's the guy. The reason, we're not playing it live anymore. Yeah.
But he's also the guy that says, "That's it. I'm not a Beatle anymore." And right on the heels of this high water mark in what would be the whole arc of their career, 3 compositions on a single Beatle disc, including the opening track, which, as we know, they fought over. That was something, that was a prestigious place to be, and John usually won. And George gets it. So you think he's built himself to this near parody level in the Beatles. And what's he do? He goes to India, takes a step back. It's like, you know what? Rock and roll, so it's too small for me. I can't do this anymore.
And I don't think they ever got him back.
Pepper.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, and Pepper, he didn't want to even to have a song, and they talked him into "Within You, Without You," which is a great contribution to that. He has his 2 greatest songs on Abbey Road, certainly. I think.
Sure,
yeah.
But I really do think his heart was not in it. It just was not in it.
Well, the way John's always going overboard, I'm sure it could be maddening, and is also what made him great. I would say something similar about George is that I think he was always exceedingly level-headed, unimpressed, if you like. There's different ways to say it.
Despite being the youngest one.
And
right.
Yes, I mean, going back to, you hear stories of the early days, how a lot of people couldn't take John's causticness when they were teenagers. And George just always said he thought George was too young, and I'm sure said so. And George's quote was something like, "Oh, I just gave him the same back or took no mind, and it was fine." The way you see Ringo watching Paul play piano in the Get Back sessions, and he's going, he's so great. George never, ever seemed overly impressed with Lennon and McCartney, with being a Beatle, with fame, with the whole thing. On the one hand, you want him to say, "Hey, come on, George, get a little excited.
Yeah.
Go up on the rooftop.
Right.
Why are you fighting everything?" On the other hand, he seems cool.
Yes, he's the one who puts the kibosh on them playing live anywhere else. So the roof's the last thing they could do, and they won't even do that. But the other thing, you make a great point, and it's what we've been saying over and over again now, and it's so true. They're just a perfect balance. You need a Ringo in your band. You need a George. Yeah. You cannot have 4 Johns. You can't have 4 Pauls. You can't even have 2 Pauls. 2 Pauls is Oasis. You can't have it. You have to have that balance, and they have that balance. Most of the great bands do. You look at Pink Floyd, and you got what Waters brought and what Gilmour brought. Obviously, Keith and Mick. I think you do have but there's no better quadrant balance than the Beatles in that sense. And George, what you're saying about George is absolutely true. Somebody there has to be blasé about all this. To Paul, everything was end all be all. It's about what are we doing next? What are we going to do? And that's great. You need that guy. Otherwise, the Beatles probably would have been done in '66.
Right.
For John, he's just like, he's your let's get back to reality situation. It was his band, so sometimes he cracks the whip, which is odd to say about John because he was trying to escape reality all the time. But there is some grounded aspect to John. And of course, you need Ringo, who's sitting there with the sticks in his hands going, are we doing this or what? So I think those guys balanced each other beautifully. And that's what other thing I love about Get Back. I mean, it illustrates this. That was the big revelation for me. Not that, Yoko wasn't the Dragon Lady or that the Beatles didn't hate each other. The Beatles were still breaking up. Yoko was still a problem. John was still on smack. You know what I mean? George was still felt like left out of the John-Paul dynamic. But the thing that you get out of that is that the Beatles are just really great. And it reinforces that aspect of it. That if you get them in the room, you see all the parts working. Mm-hmm. They work somehow. And that's the magic.
Well, if one theme of this conversation is that a lot of Paul's stuff has aged well, one I would say is you briefly touched on it, the moment in Twickenham Studios in the Let It Be sessions when he tells Paul, I'll play or I won't play, I'll whatever you want. And when I would watch that, like in college.
In the original film,
Yeah, the original, the students would cheer for George at that moment. Like, don't let that authority figure tell you what to do.
Right.
The way you don't want to let teachers tell you what to do. And you look back and it's like, you realize, like with the echoing lines on Hey Jude, it's like Paul was just trying to get him to play that bent guitar line on I've Got a Feeling. I'm not saying to George, no, see, George, you shouldn't have been annoyed. You should have been grateful that this musical genius was trying to get you on the right track. I understand George's feelings, but it
doesn't help when Paul brings up Hey Jude in that moment.
He does.
It's like Hey Jude. It's like, I'm going to stick my finger into that wound and twist
it. A great point, Robert. Yeah. That is so true. I forgot about that. I got to watch that again. I
got to watch that again. I had forgot. I didn't realize that.
There's a great scene in that. I think you mentioned it in one of your previous podcasts I was watching, Robert, and that is there's that scene where John and Paul are joking about how they used to make the crazy voices with Maharishi and how they were trying to be the cute, the quiet schoolboys. And, oh, you know what I mean? They had a certain voice around him. And you could see George in the middle of the shot fuming.
Yeah.
And finally, George says, maybe what you were doing was real. Maybe this is crap. Maybe this is the fake. Beatle John and Beatle Paul making fun of it. Maybe this is the phonies. What you were doing there was real. And they immediately changed the subject, end of story. So there's a classic example on a literal sense and a vocal sense where George kind of breaks through the stop being full of yourselves, because that was a cool thing and you're not going to ruin that for me.
That seemed to be an overriding preoccupation with him, as late as there's that, I think it's called 57th Street was the CBS news magazine they had in the 80s where he's being interviewed. So it's in the 80s. It's well after the Beatle years. And that quote, sometimes John and Paul were too busy, John and Paul, to notice other people around them.
Yeah.
It's like, it's still a sore point of him being the third wheel in that dynamic.
Yeah. And also that with the Maharishi, Paul, his first quote when he got back, because he was technically the spokesman after Brian died. And he said, look, we thought he was more than he was. He wasn't. It was something we like to do. It's fine. We move on. But more than anybody else, except for George, Paul still does the mantra. And I quote in the book, the one thing that really kept coming back to Paul later in life was that quote by the Maharishi, you go where the heart is most warm. Go where the heart is. It's warmest where the heart is. Something like that. Yeah, and so Paul constantly used that in his empathetic songwriting, all the way up to Ebony and Ivory and things like that. I mean, he was constantly thinking about what we talked about earlier with Hey Jude, how do we smooth things out, make things calmer, relax? It's not really an escapist tune I talk about in the book. Mm-hmm. It's escape in the very literal sense. Get out of the cycle of despair and anguish. Forget about that. There's a way you could break that, and only you can do it. Of course,
and you can do it.
And you can. You're not right. Yeah. He says you can if you. And you
have help. Yeah.
You have help. And and I've said this many times, and I'll say it again. That Paul is not saying, well, if you need medication or you need friends or you need maybe religion in your life, whatever you need, that's fine. But you have to make that first step. And that's a very, very interesting thing to say in the 60s, which was all about the group dynamic, joining a group, being part of a movement. The movement you need is on your shoulder, right? So it's this idea that I think is very, very unique, to get back to Hey Jude. And it's something that, like you were saying earlier, Robert, the Beatles, or both you guys were saying this, that the Beatles were put on such a lofty pedestal. Everybody wanted answers for them. And here's Paul going, yeah, you have the answer.
Mm-hmm.
You're the one with
mirror. I'm going to hold it up.
Well, yeah, profound insights, needn't be esoteric.
Right.
And they needn't just come from experienced old people. Here we're talking about guys in their 20s who it resonated because he happened to be spot on.
Yeah, 26 years old. And I'm always reminded of Joni Mitchell's Both Sides Now, which she wrote when she was 21, which is crazy. It's like Paul writing when I'm 64,
really?
When I was 16. It's insane. You know what I mean? It's an amazing, when Joni
I always thought that was about the best lyric imaginable.
I agree. It's a gorgeous song, but it's written from a woman who's lived through life and has gone through all the different changes. And she was so young. So
didn't realize she was that young. Wow.
When she sang that when she was like 65 or something on those later recordings, that is in the Love Actually film. They use it so beautifully in the Love Actually film. It's with that raspy voice. And she's now become that person. She's become it. But she's singing these lyrics that she wrote 40 something years ago. It's crazy. Songwriters, they are fascinating because they get us on every level, don't they? I mean, Adam, who, by the way, I got to meet through doing interviews with him, and then we were working on a book together. And he always said over and over again, and I got him to say it in my book because it's very true. He's like, lyrics, they come from experience. They come from the dictionary. They come from our experience of writing as a kid and reading letters and writing emails. Melodies, who the hell knows where any of that comes from? That's from the whole other world. And Paul brings it down. So songwriters have that extra thing that all of us writers are a little jealous of because they're working on two levels for us. They're working on that sonic level and they're working on the literal level. And that sweeps us up. That's what makes us think of these great memories. That's what takes us back. That's what makes us swoon and think of our first kiss or our first beer or the first time we saw the sunset or the first time we drove, with our top down. That's what music does for us. Paul knows this.
Paul's ability to make music behave the way people can have a way
Very
with
good
animals
point.
or something.
Behave. I love it.
Well, I always thought, on Here, There, and Everywhere, changing my life with a wave over, and he changes the key on that. We talked about some things he does on Penny Lane, the way the music goes up when the key goes down on the chorus to where it's
which it does in Hey Jude too.
Joyful and at the same time wistful. I started thinking about it with Hey Jude, of when he's singing, he's right on the chords, and then he sings Take a Sad Song. He's in the key of C. He's playing a C chord, but he sings an F note, which isn't a sad note. It's a suspended note. And you're just thinking, that guy, he can conjure an emotion with a melody.
So that's the trick, is if you can marry...
Purely instinctive.
Yeah, right. Because I don't think he was that contrived about what he was doing. He's doing it all intuitively. But when you can marry the absolute perfect message and crafted lyrics to exactly the right melody at the same time, that's when you've got so much power that you're presenting that's absolutely going to hit people in the gut. There's plenty of examples of songs where the lyrics don't necessarily fit the tune you're hearing at the same time, or a great message with completely inappropriate music. But when they mesh together, and I think it might have been, I saw that Netflix Creedence thing recently. I think John Fogerty, if I'm not mistaken, says the same thing, where if you can make the words fit the music that you're putting out at the same time, how much more satisfying it is as a composer, but also to the listener, that it's got an authenticity that it projects because what you're feeling when you're hearing it matches the message your brain's receiving.
We haven't even talked about how simple the lyrics are. Just at the opening line, Hey Jude, don't make it bad. That sounds like a kid talking.
Well, that's what I said before. It's that naive sense. What does Denzel Washington say in the movie Philadelphia? Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Yeah,
he says that over and over again. It's that idea of like, let's strip this down to the base model. He's talking to a kid, and he never loses that sense of naivete in that song. I agree 100% with that.
And he rhymes better with better. I mean, if you were handed the lyrics, you would not have. But I think Oscar Hammerstein taught young Stephen Sondheim, singing words changes them.
Yes.
Exactly. I'm just what you were just saying in a different way.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think one of my favorite songwriters is Randy Newman. And Randy would never rhyme say with state or day with it had to be an A rhyme. He would torture himself over these things. But then later on, he realized he would always get jealous of people who could do it, because he said, when you're singing it, it doesn't matter. He couldn't separate the page from the singing. Obviously not a great vocalist, Randy Newman, and a wonderful composer of course, of soundtrack films as well. But that's the difference between someone like Paul, getting back to silly love songs and all the other things. He just doesn't, it's so carefree. Somebody mentioned in my book that, John's this kind of closed fist. That's what losing his mother and being left by his father. And he saw rock and roll as this vengeance. And Paul just saw it as this great escape, fun thing that's going to make life worth living. And I think you hear that a lot in Paul's songs. You do.
Yeah, he's very much a come join the party, people kind of guy.
He understands. I have a friend of mine who's not well. He doesn't have a life-threatening illness, but it's a life-changing one. And we were emailing back and forth this week, and he was like, I am enjoying this life more than ever. When I was writing this book, it was during the pandemic. So there was a feeling that there was a finite to it. None of us knew, is this going to be 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months? But I knew I had the time to do it. I don't know if I would have hunkered down as quickly or worked as hard to get everybody and to start to work on the book if I knew it was going to be a year. I thought it could be a month, 2 months. I've got this time. I've got to take this time. Sometimes that's what happens when you realize that life is not forever. So if you're as talented and as cool and as handsome and as, have had a life like Paul, enjoy the hell out of it, man. And he does. And I think his songs reflect that.
Well, McCartney, of course, knew more keenly than most of us life isn't forever, just having lost his mother and his manager and his partner and his wife. Just very admirable. What a resourceful optimist he's been all these years.
It's true. Yeah. Do you guys have a favorite songwriter besides people in the Beatles? Or
if I had to pick a rock writer outside of the Beatles, and an emphasis on rock writer as opposed to...
It doesn't have to be. It could be anybody. It could be any songwriter.
Well, okay, but it's easier for the point because there's plenty of people I love outside the sphere of rock, like a Duke Ellington, which of course includes Billy Strayhorn. As a rock writer, the immediate one that comes to mind is Pete Townsend.
One of my faves too. Yeah.
I'm
Jeff?
afraid we're discussing him. So I'm dull.
Okay.
Yeah, and you could
Perhaps it's come through in the course of the last 2 hours that I'm a Paul fan.
you could do worse. Well, I'm glad a Paul fan liked this book when I began. I have to say, overall, I've always been a John guy and a Ringo guy for what we said before. My brother's a drummer. I can play the drums. I know I am not one of those people who feel like anybody can play the drums and do it well and express himself the way he does in A Day in the Life with the drums. And in this song, quite frankly, in the course of writing this book and learning about Paul and realizing everything he went through, all the things that annoyed me about Paul, I was one of those people who used to cheer for George too on that scene. But I get it now. It's like Michael Lindsay Hogg. When I was talking to Michael when they were putting the movie together, he goes, I'm going to look so bad in this movie. I've seen rushes because I'm constantly trying to corral these guys. I'm constantly asking when they're going to play their concert. What the hell's going on? What movie are we making? And I come across as a big pain in the ass. I'm bothering the Beatles, but he had a job to do. Paul had a job to do. He's either we're going to be a band or not. Paul kept saying, what are we going to do? Okay, maybe you don't want to do Magical Mystery Tour. What ideas do you guys have? We have to do something.
Right.
And
He's not trying to dictate. He just wants to get something going.
And that's why, and besides the fact that he's probably the best musician in the band and the best songwriter in the band overall, I fell in love with Paul. And he's my favorite Beatle now. And I don't see that changing after spending a year with him the way I did.
At least till you write your Strawberry Fields book.
I don't, it's funny. I could not, if you guys were going to write a book about a song, if you were going to pick a song that you think you'd like to, let's put it this way, that you'd like to read about, it doesn't have to be a Beatles song. What would it be?
Good question. Part of what would inform my thinking is what would sustain my interest and what is something that maybe is underappreciated or underserved in the literature. And so I guess I would shy away from like the big grand, I wouldn't write a song about Yesterday or something like that.
Or Hey Jude.
Because
what you're saying,
I was going to top that one.
It's too many on the spot. You're right. That's a good point. I did battle with myself at first. I'm like, seriously, you're going to write a song about Hey Jude? Why don't you just write a book about, I don't know, Bohemian Rhapsody? When we were talking about things that are grand statements. That's a great point. You're looking for something that's kind of overlooked.
Yeah, right.
By writing your book, you can bring people to it.
Right. And I feel like podcast we did several years back on Revolution 9 was for the point of quit skipping this track, people. At least respect the effort and the form and the thought that went behind it. It's not just splattering sounds against the wall over the course of 8 minutes. There's actual craft and thought to this.
I love that.
Yeah. Yep. And that might be something I'd write a book about if I had to write a book on a single song, just to like wise people the hell up. It's like, you can hate it if you like at the end of reading this, but at least respect it.
I think I got an answer for you for my favorite songwriter other than one of the Beatles. I think it's actually Buddy Holly. I find it uncanny that they're all great. It was a compressed period and they're all great. He also, I think, had the insight that the simplicity is profound. That just singing "You're the One,"
yeah,
you don't have to get more complicated than that.
Yeah, and then the biggest influence, I would argue, the biggest influence on the Beatles, you have the Everly Brothers, Little Richard, Elvis, obviously. But for me, pound for pound, Buddy Holly. That's why I think if Buddy Holly had lived, there would have been less of a need for the Beatles experimentally. Wow. I think he would have had strings and backwards tracks and done all that kind of stuff himself. He was kind of like Prince in that way. He was the songwriter, the producer, he was Prince back in the 50s. He was, the auteur, he was the guy.
The visionary, yeah.
The visionary. I'm not saying that the Beatles wouldn't have been. What I'm saying to you is that I think Buddy Holly might have stumbled on that stuff first.
Right.
Oh, no,
and you're not the first person to observe that. I get that comment every time I post about Buddy Holly. If he'd lived, there'd be no need for the Beatles. I think there's a kernel of truth in that. And maybe the Beatles would have taken a different form and maybe not been as big. But I certainly take your point that his interests and wide range of talents in all directions would have fanned out into the rock and roll field and pushed the parameters in the way that the Beatles eventually did.
And also, let's not forget the Beatles were English.
Yeah.
America needed that. Timing is everything in this world. And the Beatles coming here changed everything. Maybe they wouldn't have done the experimental stuff as much, or maybe they would have done it better. I mean, you still have the Beach Boys. At the same time, Brian Wilson is doing amazing stuff. The Beatles are doing amazing stuff. Nobody ever says there's no reason for Pet Sounds because we have Revolver.
Right. Good point.
There's plenty of room for geniuses, for sure. Buddy Holly's a good one, though. Do you have a song, though, that you'd pick?
Oh, I think Atlantis.
I love it. He's sticking with Atlantis. I love it. But it was, it's funny. It was a labor of love. I mean, obviously, I get paid for these things, so it wasn't a complete labor of love. But in the sense of, it was something I enjoy all my books when I work on them, and I love writing about music. And Robert was kind enough to come in and compliment me on my column writing and that kind of stuff. But to me, I love to escape I love to have perspective and to look back on something and see the impact of it. And for me, the emotional currency that popped into my head one night, I jotted it into a pad and I'm like, this could be the title of the book. This is my true north. I have to get to what the emotional currency is in this song and in songs that inspire us, whether it's Atlantis or Day in the Life. No, seriously, that's what I wanted. In the first interview I did, it was
Peggy Sue.
Why don't we do it in the road? Yeah,
Right.
I mean, that's that kind of stuff. I'm just saying that does something to us that is inexplicable, and I try to explain it. It's a crazy thing, but I enjoyed doing it.
It is a crazy task to undertake for sure. And if I can't imagine anybody doing it better than you did in this book, in a song that is as profound and so much to talk about on so many levels to it. And this isn't blowing smoke, but it just is actual. I wouldn't have thought a Hey Jude book without padding would have been possible. And you did it. And it's like, holy shit, this is amazing. So kudos, congratulations. It's a hell of a book. And I hope every fan listening to this checks it out.
Thank you both. This is the one podcast I must admit I'm dying to listen to. You guys said, because, I probably missed a few things in there we said. And then we covered so much in this thing. I mean, it's a book in itself. We covered so many aspects of what make not just Hey Jude, but I like the Beatle talk because this is what I'm saying. When you dive into any Beatles story, there are layers in there that you can mine. And I think
many
that's a huge
avenues
part of
to
it.
go down.
Yeah.
That will take you to all kinds of places. I was hanging out with, this is going to sound like humble bragging, it's not. The Smithereens are in town, and I'm good friends with Dennis Dyken and Jim Babchek. And we spent 4 hours hanging yesterday talking about all kinds of stuff that, as young Beatle fans, the roads they took us down into tracing their origins. And it's like, I don't know if, clearly it wasn't their goal when they started, but I wonder if Paul McCartney today has any realization of the education the Beatles gave the world in just being who they were, that if you're a curious, intelligent fan, you're going to want to find out, well, where did that come from? Oh, Fats Waller. Cool. Let me check that stuff out. In a million different directions. TM, Indian music, you name it. And I can't point to too many other cultural vehicles like that there's their own core, unique talents and work. But the deeper you peel back the onion layers, it's going to shoot you off in all kinds of different directions that will enrich your life. So that is some real power.
It's true. And just one last thing about the Stones for me, because I'm a big Stones guy. The thing that I think was the biggest gift for me, speaking to what you just said, is that if it wasn't for the Rolling Stones, I never would have saw Muddy Waters live when I did. I never would have saw Count Basie. I wouldn't have never seen Chuck Berry. I wouldn't have seen all these great, Johnny Winter. I got to see so many great blues artists. I fell in love with the blues, and it took me back. And I know that's what the Beatles did for rock and roll too. All those women groups that they covered all the, and it reminded people about our music. They gave the gift back to us. And that's the great thing about it. What you just said there, I agree with 100%.
Something About the Beatles. Created and hosted by Robert Rodriguez. Executive producer Rick Way. Title song performed by the Corgis. Something About the Beatles is an evergreen podcast.